Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Beneath a pale moon in the distant land of Talmaris, the night air shimmered with the crackle of magic. Arian stood alone in a forest clearing, his breath shallow as he concentrated on the shimmering orb of energy forming between his hands. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles strained under the weight of unseen forces. The once exiled prince had grown stronger, stronger than he'd ever imagined when he first set foot in this foreign land after his banishment. The hatred and pain of that day, of seeing his father slain and his uncle claiming the throne, had been his fuel. But now, his powers were forged from something deeper. Focus, Arian. Power is meaningless without control. The gruff voice of his master, Eldrian, echoed across the clearing. Arian let out a slow breath, steadying his hands as the magical energy danced in the space between his palms. The glowing orb pulsed once, twice, before dissolving into the cool night air. His body slackened with the release of tension. "I'm ready," Arian said, his voice rough but determined. He turned to face the aged figure standing in the shadows. Eldrian's face, lined with years of experience and loss, revealed nothing, but his pale eyes gleamed with approval. "Ready for what?" Eldrian asked, stepping forward with the deliberate pace of someone who'd seen more than enough war to know its true cost. "Ready to reclaim your throne? Or ready to face the truth of what that truly means?" Arian's jaw tightened. "I've trained for years. I've honed my swordsmanship, mastered your ancient magic. I will defeat my uncle. I will take back what's mine." "Yours?" Eldrian raised an eyebrow. "And what will you do with it once it's yours? Sit upon your throne with your enemy's blood staining the crown? Power without wisdom is the quickest path to ruin." Arian's eyes darkened. He'd heard this lecture countless times before, but his anger refused to let the words sink in. "He killed my father," Arian spat. "My people are suffering under his rule. They need me." "Yes, they need you," Eldrian said, placing a firm hand on Arian's shoulder. "But they need more than your sword. They need a king, not a vengeful boy." Arian turned away, staring into the darkness of the forest, his heart pounding with the conflict he couldn't shake. Eldrian's words haunted him, but he couldn't forget the screams from that night, the flash of steel as his father fell. His uncle, King Malker, had stolen everything from him. He couldn't let that go. Weeks passed, and one fateful morning, Arian received a message. Lady Selene had found him. The letter bore her personal seal, a small silver crescent, and the moment Arian saw it, his heart quickened. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the hurried script. "Arian, your people cry out for you. Viridel suffers. King Malker grows more brutal by the day. The time has come for your return. Come home. Reclaim your throne." His hands trembled as he folded the letter. The moment he had dreamed of, trained for, was finally here. "Master," Arian said, approaching Eldrian with a determined stride. "I must leave. Viridel needs me." Eldrian turned from his brewing pot of herbs, his face unreadable. "Then go, Arian. But remember this. The man who sets foot on Viridel's soil will determine the kingdom's fate, not the boy who left it." Arian offered a slight bow, though frustration simmered beneath his skin. With that, he packed his belongings and set out, ready to face his destiny. The road back to Viridel was fraught with danger. As Arian journeyed through the wild, he encountered the remnants of his kingdom's once proud warriors, now scattered rebels fighting in the shadows. Among them was Torvald, a knight who had served Arian's father faithfully. Weathered but still strong, Torvald fell to one knee before Arion, swearing his sword to the rightful heir. "You've grown, your highness," Torvald said, his grizzled face breaking into a weary smile. "But the weight you carry has grown heavier too." "I won't carry it alone," Arion replied, lifting the old knight to his feet. "We'll take back our kingdom together." Torvald led Arion through the rebel camps hidden deep in the woods, where more allies gathered to join their cause. Among them was Mira, a rogue mage with a mysterious past and a knack for bending fire to her will. Her sharp wit and sharper tongue grated on Arion at first, but her loyalty was fierce, and she soon became an indispensable part of the growing rebellion. As they ventured closer to Viridel, they encountered resistance, mercenaries hired by Malker to secure his throne. Arion's swordsmanship, honed by Eldrian's teachings, proved deadly in each skirmish, but it was his growing mastery of magic that left his enemies trembling. Fire, lightning, and ice answered his call, cutting down all who stood in his way, yet with every victory, Arion could feel the darkness of revenge tugging at him. Every time his blade met flesh, he heard the echo of his father's death, the rage burning hotter in his chest. "You fight with more than your sword," Mira said one night as they sat by the fire after a long battle. "You're fighting with your soul." Arion looked away, the flickering flames reflected in his eyes. "I'm fighting for my kingdom." "Maybe," Mira said quietly. "But a kingdom isn't built on hatred. Not a lasting one." Finally, they arrived at the gates of Viridel. The capital city had become a shadow of its former self, the once vibrant streets now filled with fear and oppression. The people barely raised their heads as Arion and his allies prepared for the final assault. Word of the true prince's return spread like wildfire, and the rebels swelled in number. But Malker had fortified his defenses. The city was surrounded by soldiers, the castle itself brimming with magic and deadly traps. The siege began at dawn, Arion leading the charge. His sword flashed in the early light as he cut through enemy lines with ruthless precision, his magic tearing down barriers and scorching the earth. Beside him, Torvald fought with the strength of 10 men, while Myra's flames raged like a living thing, consuming their enemies. The battle was brutal and bloody. For every inch they gained, lives were lost, but Arion pressed on, his focus unyielding. He could feel the pull of the throne that was his by birthright, the throne his uncle had stolen. As they stormed the castle, Arion's eyes locked on the throne room doors. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment he had waited for. He burst into the throne room, his blade raised, and there, sitting casually on the throne, was Malker. The years had been kind to the false king. He smirked as Arion approached, his sword dripping with the blood of those who had stood in his way. "So, the boy returns," Malker said, rising to his feet, his own sword gleaming at his side. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten your place." "My place is here," Arion growled, stepping forward. "And yours is beneath my blade." Malker laughed, a deep, hollow sound that echoed through the empty chamber. "You think killing me will make you a king?" Arion's hand tightened around his sword hilt. "You killed my father." Malker's smirk faded, replaced with something darker. "Your father was weak. He led Viridel into ruin. I saved it." "By enslaving its people?" Arion's voice trembled with rage. "By ruling through fear?" Malker's eyes gleamed with malice. "Fear is power, boy. And power is all that matters." They clashed, swords ringing through the air, magic crackling as it collided in bursts of light. Arion fought with every ounce of strength he had, his body moving on instinct, every lesson Eldrian had taught him coming to life in the heat of battle. But with every strike, every clash of steel, Arion felt the weight of his father's death, the pain and anger driving him to the edge of madness, and then, in a moment of clarity, Arion remembered Eldrian's words. Power without wisdom is the quickest path to ruin. He stepped back, his sword faltering for a brief second. In that moment, Malker struck, sending Arion crashing to the ground, his sword skittering across the floor. The false king loomed over him, his sword raised for the killing blow, but Arion didn't move. "Do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Prove you're the king you say you are." Malker hesitated. And in that hesitation, Arion saw the truth. The man standing before him wasn't a king. He was a coward, hiding behind power he didn't deserve. With a roar, Arion rolled to the side, reaching out with his magic. The force of it sent Malker flying across the room, crashing into the stone wall. Arion rose to his feet, his heart pounding, his body trembling with the weight of the decision before him that he could kill Malker. End it all. Avenge his father. But a true king didn't rule through vengeance. A true king ruled through wisdom. Arion lowered his sword. "You're not worth it," he said, his voice steady. "I won't become the monster you are." Malker stared at him, disbelief flickering across his face as Arion turned away. The people of Viridel hailed their new king with cheers, the throne room filled with their jubilant voices. But Arion didn't feel the triumph he had expected. Instead, he felt the weight of his choice. The kingdom was his, but the cost had been high. With Malker imprisoned, Arion began the long process of rebuilding Viridel. He sought alliances with neighboring lands, reformed the laws to protect his people, and slowly, the kingdom began to heal. By his side were his trusted allies, Torvald, Mira, and Lady Selene, each playing a vital role in the new government. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Arion stood on the castle battlements, staring out over the land he had fought so hard to reclaim. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest scent of ash and blood, remnants of the battle that had just been won. But Arion knew now that ruling wasn't about battles or vengeance. It was about peace, wisdom, and the strength to lead with compassion, not fear. He had reclaimed his throne. But more importantly, he had reclaimed himself. Arion stood on the castle battlements, the cool night air brushing against his skin as he looked out over Viridel. The city below was slowly coming back to life. In the days following the battle, the streets had been filled with people, cautious but hopeful, as they began to rebuild what had been lost. The air, once thick with fear and despair, now carried the distant sounds of hammers striking stone and laughter bubbling up from small clusters of families. It felt foreign to him. Peace. After years of training, bloodshed, and vengeance driving his every move, the stillness was almost unsettling. His fingers grazed the stone edge of the wall, and he let his gaze drift over the horizon, where the last traces of sunset had given way to the deep indigo of twilight. Behind him, he heard the sound of soft footsteps approaching. He didn't turn, already knowing who it was. "You look like a man lost in thought." Myra's voice was light, but there was an edge of curiosity beneath it. "Shouldn't you be celebrating with the rest of us?" Arion chuckled softly. "Celebrating what?" She came to stand beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon as well. "Victory. You're king now. You've done what you set out to do." He didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch between them. Mira, ever patient, didn't press. She knew him too well by now. Finally, he let out a breath. "Is this what it's supposed to feel like?" Mira raised an eyebrow. "What, victory?" Arian shook his head. Being king. All this time, I thought it would feel. I don't know, satisfying. Like I'd finally have what I wanted. But now that it's over, I just feel empty, she finished for him, her tone softer now that he nodded. Is that strange? Mira leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. Not strange. Just human. You spent so long chasing after this, after revenge. It's no surprise you're wondering what comes next. Arian rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion press down on him. I thought taking back the throne would make everything right. That I'd feel whole again. But it's just more responsibility. More decisions. And all of it comes with a cost. Myra's expression turned serious. Being king isn't just about ruling from a throne. You've seen that. It's about the people. Every decision you make now affects them. He closed his eyes, feeling the truth of her words sink in. The people of Viridel had looked to him with hope, with expectations that he would lead them to a better future. And now, as the weight of the crown settled on his head, he realized just how heavy it truly was. You've always been a fighter, Arian, Mira said after a moment. But now you'll need to learn how to lead in peace. It's a different kind of battle. One that doesn't end with swords and magic. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he admitted quietly. She smiled, her eyes softening in the fading light. No one ever is. But you have allies. You don't have to do it alone. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small, grateful smile. What would I do without you? Probably burn the whole kingdom down, she teased, but there was warmth in her voice. Good thing I'm here to keep you in line. Arian laughed, the sound surprising even him. For a moment, the tension that had gripped him since the battle loosened. But it didn't disappear entirely. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There were still scars left to heal, both in the kingdom and within himself. As if reading his thoughts, Mira reached out and placed a hand on his arm. You're not the same boy who left this kingdom, Arian. You've grown. You'll find your way. And you'll be a better king than you think. He covered her hand with his own, the warmth of her touch grounding him. Thank you, Mira. For everything. She gave his arm a gentle squeeze before stepping back. Don't thank me yet. There's still work to be done. As she turned to leave, Arian's gaze followed her. He knew she was right. The battle for Viridel may have been won, but the real challenges were just beginning. Being a king wasn't about wielding power or claiming victory. It was about serving, about leading with wisdom and compassion, even when the path was uncertain. And for the first time since he'd set out on his journey, Arian felt a flicker of something other than vengeance or ambition. He felt the stirrings of hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Arian threw himself into his new role, meeting with advisors, overseeing the rebuilding efforts, and ensuring that the people of Viridel were cared for. He worked alongside his allies. Torvald, ever loyal, served as his chief military advisor, while Mira, with her sharp mind and even sharper magic, helped fortify the kingdom's defenses. But it wasn't just about protection. Arian knew that the wounds of his uncle's reign ran deep. Many of the people had been scarred by years of oppression, and he had to work to regain their trust. He spent long hours walking the streets, talking with the citizens, listening to their concerns. It was slow work, but gradually, he began to see the fruits of his efforts. Smiles returned to the faces of the people, and the once fearful whispers began to fade. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm him. Late at night, alone in the castle, Arion would find himself staring at the throne, wondering if he was truly worthy of it. The ghosts of the past haunted him, the image of his father lying dead, the betrayal, the bloodshed. He had achieved what he'd set out to do, but the price had been high. And sometimes, in the stillness of the night, he wasn't sure if he could bear it. One such night, he found himself standing in the throne room, his eyes fixed on the crown that rested atop the throne. The moonlight streamed in through the windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. He'd worn the crown many times since his coronation, but it still felt foreign to him, as though it belonged to someone else. "You should be sleeping," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Arion turned to see Lady Selene, her figure silhouetted against the light of the hallway. She had been one of his strongest supporters, leading the rebellion in his absence and fighting fiercely to see him restored to the throne. But even now, she remained a figure of mystery to him. "I could say the same to you," he replied with a tired smile. She stepped into the room, her eyes briefly flicking to the crown before settling on him. "I'm not the one with a kingdom to run." Arion chuckled softly. "That's debatable. You've been doing most of the running these days." Selene smiled faintly, but her gaze remained serious. "You've done well, Arion. Better than many expected." "Is that your way of saying I wasn't expected to succeed?" Her eyes softened. "You were expected to struggle. And you have. But that's how true leaders are made." Arion's shoulders sagged as he let out a long breath. "Some days I wonder if I'm truly fit to lead. I've spent so long fighting, but this, ruling a kingdom, it's different." "It is," she agreed. "But you're learning. And that's what matters. No one is born a king, Arion. Even your father had his doubts in the beginning." Arion looked at her, surprised. "You knew him well?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I did. He was a good man. A good king. But he wasn't without his flaws. No one is. You'll find your way, just as he did." He studied her, wondering how much more there was to her story. But before he could ask, she stepped back toward the doorway. "Get some rest," she said gently. "The kingdom will still be here in the morning." With that, she left, leaving Arion alone once more. But her words lingered in the air, offering a small measure of comfort. Perhaps it wasn't about being perfect. Perhaps it was enough just to keep trying, to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As he stood there, the moonlight casting a silver glow across the throne, Arion felt something shift within him. He may not have all the answers, and the road ahead would no doubt be filled with challenges. But for the first time since taking the throne, he felt a quiet sense of resolve. He would lead his people, not with the weight of his past, but with the promise of a better future. And as long as he had his allies by his side, he knew he wouldn't face that future alone.